the coast of New Jersey are some of the finest beaches to be found anywhere in the world. Here, on a narrow neck of land, nestled between the Atlantic Ocean and the quiet waters of Barnegat Bay, is the town that Fun built.
This is all irrelevant. And the one in Irvington, New Jersey was called Olympic Park. And what they all had in common, these opened up all across the East Coast, they all had the look of a World's Fair. And so the entryway was this grand, multi-pillared, beautiful lights, shadowy, big sculptures, candles with the bare-breasted Olympian athlete, things, but you were pretty much going into an area that had, a roller coaster, an arcade, and a beer garden. I didn't know until years later that the beer garden was the big draw for my parents to go there every damn Sunday of our lives. But Olympic Park was one of the earliest, and it was near where I grew up, and we went to that place, I'd say every other Sunday in my childhood for like 10 years.
Hurry, step this way, the strangest sight from the island. Bricks from the four corners of the world. For 2 nickels, 1 dime, a 10th part of a dollar. We've got the show if you've got the dime.
Okay, so the other big allure of Olympic Park and these other places, I'm not kidding, they had a different, we knew the rides inside out. We went every damn Sunday. And my parents, and I didn't realize this till decades later, would give Bob and I $1 for the penny arcade, where in fact most games were a penny or a nickel. So we'd be gone for an hour or 2 hours, and rides were 10 cents to go on the Wild Mouse or the roller coaster or bumping cars and stuff like that. And it was so that they could drink and listen to, in the beer garden, to musicians my dad had performed with. He knew them all. Anyway, but the key thing was they had a different 3-ring circus. Every Sunday they changed it, and they had 3 acts that toured a circuit of state fairs and amusement parks like this one. And my dad knew some of those guys from when he was a hot fiddler. So it'd be the guy who would whip the cigarette out of the girl's mouth, or he'd throw the knives at the girl spinning on the board, or it'd be that giant hamster wheel with some nutty German guy running on top of it. And Eunice, was that his name? The guy who ended up on Ed Sullivan, who would balance himself on his pinky, on a sphere on stage. I love that shit. I always loved that shit. And the band, even for this modest little thing, was a live band. And there was I forget her name, a one-armed woman was the singer. That was her distinguishing characteristic. And they'd start after the announcer would introduce the act, he'd say, "All right, Professor," and they'd start playing, Fascination or whatever was appropriate for the next act. So after we went every Sunday, because that was when the 3-ring act, it wasn't really a circus, change. So you got an hour and a half of stuff. My parents would hit the beer garden, give us $1, and Bob and I would go to the arcade for a few hours, and we'd get a string of tickets and we'd go on rides. And I just loved all of that.
It's just starting, so hurry, look 'em over, the lady without a head. There are thin ones, there are fat ones, they're all inside.
So among the people who would perform at these things, my dad knew many of them from touring his, the name sounds better than it was, but he was part of it for briefly, the RKO East Coast circuit, where you would book your band, and he ended up open for strip acts. I think they played with the Andrews Sisters twice and stuff like that, but they were a good hot country western, hot fiddle band. And so we would meet some of these guys. We go to the circus, my dad would know the guy who would whip the cigarette butt out of the girl's mouth, and we'd meet him. And you go to their trailer, and I don't even know that they owned the trailer, but they had the steamer trunk. And inside the steamer trunk, they'd open it up and they'd have a picture of kings and queens and royalty and czars, people for whom they had performed in the royal courts of Europe, and that's part of their billing. And they had medals, and they were given the keys to the city, and they had nothing. They had absolutely nothing, because they had gotten that 1 gig a year where they were paid $10 instead of nothing. And to me, it was the most glamorous thing in the world. It was so profoundly appealing to me, more than the income, you could make, but that you could be that person. And for years, when my dad would introduce me to these people who in retrospect were probably the sorriest losers you could ever put together in a room with arguable talent. I was a kid, what the hell did I know? And to me, that was entertainment. It's not what you saw in Ed Sullivan. There's always the singer and it's always the same juggling act and a poodle act. It was this nut guy at Olympic Park.